this Babylonian spirit alive and well in a lot of these organizations that exist nowadays, like the United Nations, like the World Economic Forum, originally starting with the League of Nations. So I guess rewind the clock a little bit, and the League of Nations was really the first one to kind of come onto
Yeah.
the scene, but kind of walk us through these organizations that have really been underpinned and funded by the powers of darkness, if you will.
Yes. I believe what we saw in the 19th century was an occult revival.
Yeah.
When you had the House of Theosophy, the Order of the Golden Dawn, uh, coming out of fringe Freemasonry, basically. And you had all these occult organizations that were organized in Great Britain, and then came over to the United States, and then you had this whole idea that we were that mankind was going to be able to establish heaven on earth, and that was the real problem. And so you had this idea that was breaking forth all over the place right around the turn of the 20th century. World War I came along, and they claimed that that was the war to end all wars. And the League of Nations, which was the logical conclusions from this philosophy, this occult philosophy of a man-made heaven on earth, one world government kind of thing. So the League of Nations came as the outpouring of that basic philosophy right after World War One. And it was, and fortunately for us in the United States and for the rest of the world, the United States rejected it, even though Woodrow Wilson, was really one of the movers and shakers in the movement. The U.S. Congress and U.S. Senate would have no part of it because they recognized it for what it was. And so you had that come along, and it was squashed, but the spirit that went along with it never was squashed. And so,
Yeah.
1947, 1948 the Great Depression came along, and people actually turned back to God in the Depression because they lost their homes, they lost their money, they lost their livelihood. They had nowhere to turn, and they turned to God. And so there was really a great spiritual revival right after the Depression. But the forces of evil and the occult were kind of, still working in the shadows during those years, and they made a big outpouring about the same time when the nation of Israel was formed. You had the formation of the World and National Council of Churches, which was a modernist, despicable organization that denied all the basic doctrines of Christ, and they supported the people that, like, from the 20s, and Harry Emerson Fosdick and those people that were against fundamental Christianity. And fundamentalism gets a bad name because of the fundamental Islamicists and such, but fundamental Christianity is a good thing, because that's just simply a holding to the fundamentals of the faith as taught by the Word of God. And so you had all these revivals that came along, but then all of a sudden, the forces of evil had to counterattack with the United Nations. And I believe, and you'll see in my next book, that in 1947 we had an event in California with a couple of guys by the name of Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard, which exercised this ritual by the name of Babylon working, and they claimed in the predecessor to the OTO after Crowley, Kenneth Hill, is that his name? I can't remember, came out and said that he believed that Parsons and Hubbard actually opened a portal which
Yeah.
started this whole UFO phenomenon. And I also believe that it opened the portal that allowed the access of the old gods to come through even more than they were. And that's when you get the sexual revolution, and how it's morphed into the LGBTQ XYZ thing
Yeah.
going on, and then the whole transgender as it has evolved. into all these things. This is the working of the ancient gods. But along with that came the global organization of the United Nations. And from that, and under the United Nations, the United Nations has an NGO by the name of Lucis Trust. And Lucis Trust was originally formed by Alice and Foster Bailey. Alice Bailey was the predecessor to Annie Besant, who took over the House of Theosophy for H.P. Blavatsky. And Alice Bailey wrote all of these occult books, the externalization of the hierarchy, education in the New Age, a lot of the writing. And she and her husband started this organization, and they called it the Lucifer Publishing Company. And yes, it,
Oh
it was
goodness.
it was that Lucifer that
Yeah.
they named it after. They found that they had to change the name because too many people didn't like the name Lucifer, so they changed it to the Lucius Trust. And
Mm.
the sub organizations under that, this will all be in my new book. The sub organizations under that, World Goodwill, the new group of world servers, went hand in hand working with the UN and other global organizations like the Club of Rome, uh, and the excuse me, the Council for Foreign Relations, and those, and of which Rick Warren is a member, by the way, or he
Go
was.
figure.
I don't. He may have retired. Yeah, go figure. Um, so you have all these occultic, this, I mean, dark occultic theosophy is dark occultism, and so Alice Bailey, and she founded in one of the divisions under the Lucius Trust is the Arcane School. Let me go on a rabbit trail and tell you a little story. When I started researching the New Age movement back 30 years ago, my brother-in-law knew a gentleman who was probably the wealthiest man or one of the wealthiest men in his small town. And he said, Mac, I'm going to have this guy call. I'm not going to call his name. He's deceased now, but I still, for the sake of his family,
Yeah.
if anybody, I'll not call his name. But he says, Mac, this guy is researching the New Age movement too, and he said you might want to talk to him. And so I called him up, and he said, what do you want to research that for? And I said, well, I'm called of God to do it. And I said, that's the best I know to say. And he said, well, I looked into it for a reason. And he said, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but I was a member of a certain fraternal organization that, and he didn't say this, but because of his wealth, they wanted to promote me through the organization and make me one of the leaders. Uh, and he said they sent me to this course, and I was reading all these Alice Bailey books. And he said, I wasn't even a Christian at the time, and the man had since gotten saved and become a Christian. And he said I wasn't even a Christian at the time, but I went to church when I was a kid, and I knew from my third grade Sunday school lesson that what these books were saying was not lining up with the Bible at all. As a matter of fact, it was absolutely the opposite. And and he said, I just couldn't go along with what Alice Bailey was saying, and I interrupted him because that blew my mind. And I
Hmm.
said, and I said, you mean to tell me that the local Masonic lodge sent you to the arcane school to
Yeah.
promote you to the 33rd degree? And there was dead silence on the phone. There was dead silence for about 45 seconds. I thought he'd hung up.
Yeah.
And he finally said very hoarsely, probably even more hoarse than I'm getting here. He said, how did you know about that? You're
Hmm.
not supposed to know stuff like that. I said, well, I said, the truth is, I know who Alice Bailey it was. I know what the arcane school is. And I'm thinking the only fraternal organization that
That's
would
right.
do that would be the Freemasons.
Yep.
He said, well, you're exactly right. He said, that's exactly what they wanted me to
Yeah.
do. They wanted me to be a leader and they wanted to initiate me into this arcane black world, and
That's right.
I was not going to do it.
Yep.
And so that's what's going on behind the scenes here with these globalist organizations. They are bowing down to none other than Satan himself and the old gods, the false gods. They're bowing down and giving place to the Babylonian spirit in their lives. Not, and the problem is these people are the movers and shakers in the world today, and they want to lead us into a one world government with a one world religion and a one world leader that the Bible calls the Antichrist.